God designed us to be learners. However, much of our learning and discipleship today regarding the church, current affairs, and theology has been reduced to pithy sayings and viral tweets. Just Say It seeks to help Christians go deeper on church, theology, scripture, and current issues in our world. I'm Chase Davis.
And I'm Matt Patrick. And join us and other guests for a monthly conversation on the topics that are impacting Christians in the church here in Colorado. You can expect candid conversations on the topics ranging from church attendance during ski season to Spurgeon's view of the atonement. Hey, thanks for joining the Just Say It podcast. We're diving in this week. We're getting after it. Like we said, we want to just say it. And so we're going to get after the things that our church specifically, and things we're hearing in a broader sense as well. And so I'm here with my co-host, Chase Davis. And this week, we're going to discuss the topic of what does it mean when we say from the pulpit that we should want our town to become more Christian, or that we should want a Christian town. There's a lot of things wrapped up in that. There's a lot of confusion in that topic. And what does that mean? And it's a big topic, especially since we're studying as a church the book of 1 Thessalonians right now, and looking at Paul's walk through multiple cities, the impact that he has in these cities, what's going on in them, what he's calling them to. And so these are some of the questions that we've had as we've dove into the series, as we've said things from the pulpit like we should want our world and our city, our nation, our state to become more Christian. And so we just want to kind of pull that apart a little bit this week. And so Chase, when we dive into this and start thinking about this, I know it's an area that you and I are fairly passionate about. And I would even think, going back to the earlier iterations of our church, I don't know if I would have said that.
Really?
I mean, I think I would have.
Okay.
But, you know, there's the whole joke of like being more nuanced. So I think I was much more nuanced, but I was also more abrasive back then in a weird way. I don't know. Like, we're all humans. We evolve.
Youthfulness.
Yeah, we change, right?
Sure.
And so I think I would have been afraid of offending somebody with a statement like that back then. Maybe. I don't know. It's something I've just been kind of wrestling with in my own head.
Sure.
But my conviction is I've grown as a man, as a pastor, has been, yes, a society that's more Christian is better.
Right.
Because God, as we say at the well all the time, is more about our joy than we could ever be about our own joy.
Sure.
And so pursuing him more in all areas of life, all of Christ and all of life, I think that's kind of a natural implication for a community, a city, to become Christian if we're doing what God's called us to do.
Yeah.
So what's on your mind about this as we dive into this?
Well, I remember we had a friend named Brian Brown came up and he preached on Revelation. You can go find that on our website. But he asked the question in there.
Didn't he do that in here?
It was actually in this room. Yeah.
Yeah, like that was during the COVID thing.
Yep.
Oh, man.
And that was, I think it was like a Christmas, I don't know.
Yeah,
around Christmas
we're
time.
the kind of church that does Revelation at Christmas.
Yeah, right. Very, very attractional. But he asked the provocative question, don't you want the world to be more Christian? And I think early on at the well, you know, our vision has been pretty consistent throughout, that we're here to create a Christ-devoted community which transforms our city. So that transforming the city has always been in us. Yeah. It just took us a while to figure out what that means. You know, prior to 2014, you've got kind of Aaron Renn and his positive world, negative world, neutral world paradigm. Break
that down for people a little bit, because I don't think people know what that is.
Yeah, so Aaron Renn has a podcast, The Aaron Renn Show. He's a Christian thinker, and he kind of broke down kind of in the last 50 to 100 years in American culture particularly, its relationship with Christianity and the church. And so the positive world would be understood to be something where Christianity is seen as a social good, where if you come into work and you're like, I'm a Christian, I go to this church, it's a social good. This is normally seen in like the establishment, like the WASP establishment, where you've got like kind of Protestantism as an elite status. So you go to the Anglican church in town. Yeah, it's like if you wanted to be like a good businessman in town, it was almost expected that you went to church. Exactly. Yeah, and so Christianity was seen as kind of this good thing. Like, if you said that, it was good. Then we entered into the neutral world in kind of the 80s, 70s, 80s after the sexual revolution, where really Christianity was kind of seen as this contested, like, well, that's good for you, kind of this live and let live, very libertarian ethos about, look, you know, maybe we're not Christians, but you are, and so we'll put up with you, but, you know, we're not that. And so that was that was good enough for people. And really that neutral world paradigm is a very much ruled by the boomers right now. You know, they're running a lot of organizations. And so that's the paradigm they've been used to since 80s, 90s, 2000s, and up until 2014. In 2014, kind of the crucial moments in there around 2014 were Obergefell and Ferguson. And those really fractured a lot of conceptions about America, conceptions about evangelicalism in the church. And we moved away from kind of a neutral world to a very almost negative world, is the way Ren puts it. And so in the negative world, if you show up to work and you say, I'm a Christian, you're going to kind of be seen as a pariah. You're going to be somebody who's bigoted, who's wicked, who hates people. Christians aren't known for their love.
This is why I work for the church.
Yeah, right. So you don't...
I don't have to go to work. I know I go to work, but...
yeah, don't go to work.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, clip that out.
Yeah, clip that out.
And so I think that paradigm was helpful because when we planted the well, it was 2011.
Yeah.
And I met you in 2009. So we were in that neutral world space where it was really cool that Tim Keller was going to Google and like they were welcoming him in.
Yeah.
And then what happened is all of a sudden he got invited to Princeton to receive a kind of honorary doctorate, and he got canceled. They didn't let him speak. And that was kind of the shift. And we all sensed something going on then, but we couldn't name it.
Yeah.
And so in the negative world, it's going to take more kind of declarative or concrete kind of assertions about what it means to be a Christian. So before it was like, we just want to transform society, in the city, for the city.
Yeah.
That's all we're here for. You know, we're neutral players. We want to come alongside nonprofit organizations. And now as Christians, we're coming into kind of a more contested space where if you hold Christian convictions, well, gosh, if you hold those convictions, you're not welcome to serve at the homeless shelter. Or you hold those convictions, you're not welcome to do business with us.
Yeah, a good example is like in our own city, where we are in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
We just bought a building, but we had to buy a church building.
Right.
That still had a religious use designation because our city is actively trying to make sure that no new churches exist.
Right.
I mean, that's something that's been stated to us from city officials.
Yeah.
And so that's a pretty negative thing. Like,
very negative.
If you were to go really simplistic,
Yeah.
that's just what it is, you know. And but I would say this with the negative view thing. I think a lot of people can go negative. They think cynicism. They think all those things.
Sure.
And I don't think that's really what we're saying. I think it's just forcing the church to think a little differently.
Yes.
About how we go about doing what we do, how we speak. I've felt it in my own life where I would say maybe it'd be classified as more confrontational. I'm not as good with written words as you are. I'm better with spoken word. Not necessarily better than you, but in the sense of like, well, like a good example, you've heard me use this before. I was out at Cinedis Brewing the other day.
Right.
And I heard a group of guys making fun of Christians, talking about how stupid they were. And previously, I would have gone, hey guys, tell me about why you think that. Now I just looked over and said, guys, that's super rude.
Right.
I'm a Christian and like what you're saying is mean.
Right.
And actually you sound really kind of bigoted.
Right.
And they were shocked. And we had a great conversation.
Sure.
I would still pray that they'll come to our church someday.
Sure.
Haven't seen them yet, but I think that's like an example of that mind shift that we've kind of gone through to get into this category of going, man, we really do want Christianity to permeate through things. And that result, I think, is a natural result of a city becoming more Christian when you really do. If we actually get what the neutral world people want, which is to work our way into the social atmosphere or ecosystem of our communities, isn't it to become more Christian?
Right.
I mean, you and I both spent a good amount of time in the mission field. And a regular thing, something I've been thinking about recently is this. A regular thing in the mission field is you dream about and you talk about how amazing it would be if you could get a city official that would give you an audience where you could preach the gospel to them and they would get saved. And then you would have this high-level person who becomes a Christian and makes it easier for the gospel to go forward, or maybe even shares the gospel into the culture. And it's funny to me to hear that that's viewed negatively now in our culture. What do you think about that? I mean, does that make sense what I'm saying?
No, totally. I mean, I think Paul talks about it in either 1 Thessalonians or another closing letter where he says, and especially greet those of the household of Caesar. Yeah. And I think that's a very clever dig that he's making because he's saying that the gospel has even penetrated Caesar's domain, and that it's
Okay.
within his own house. And so Paul intentionally, he's going into places that are city centers, that are centers of cultural influence. That doesn't mean that's the only places. Rural places are important too. But he knows that for immediate impact, he's going to go to kind of the capital of Macedonia, Thessalonica, and he's going to preach the gospel there. And so, I think, I was thinking about this when we had a recent meeting with some local people who are doing good gospel ministry. And we were talking about what would it look like to pray at the city council or to pray with police officers in our town. And, the culture in our town, at least, is, well, you can't talk about Jesus. Or you can't talk about the gospel being the only way. And that so perturbed me because I was like, well, what am I supposed to do then? They're like, well, it's okay. You can still kind of like pray. You just can't mention redemption. And I'm like, so that's where we're at. Like that's our model of engagement now. It's just kind of like a watered down generic Christianity. And it's not like we're trying to go out and start fights and for the sake of fighting, but like, that's a real problem for me as a Christian minister. Yeah. I'm like, look, if I'm going to pray a prayer, it's going to be explicitly Christian. But that's a good example of like, look, I would want to live in a town where the city council like welcomes prayer and welcomes Christianity because it is seen as a social good. I think of a friend in town who wrote a book on how the church, one of the hallmarks, and this was kind of a boomer mentality, was like, what would happen? What would your church think of you? Or what would your city think of you if your church disappeared tomorrow? Would they even care? And so the ploy there is kind of a compassion narrative where it's like, if the church disappears, would anyone even notice? And that was a neutral world strategy, and it had some good effect. But now it's like we're in a world where it's like, if the church disappeared tomorrow, the city would be glad because they could get more commercial property to make more money, and there wouldn't be anybody to kind of like either resist them kind of overreaching in a lot of ways into people's personal lives and individual decisions.
Yeah, and kind of stepping into that even deeper, I think Christians in our context, there's been some negative ramifications for believing this come alongside kind of attitude of that they don't ever confront the culture.
Right.
They don't confront their neighbors because they want to love their neighbors, which is a fair thing. Like, I get it. Like, I mean, like we're humans. We have real neighbors. Right. We don't want to be viewed as bigoted jerks. Right. Like nobody wants that. And so I understand the tension that's there, but I don't think the tension with those that are lost is actually as big. I think my personal experience has actually been to be more forthright has been more beneficial.
Yeah, for sure.
And we talk about it often. My neighborhood, and I get it, different callings, different gifts, so on and so forth. But my neighborhood, me talking to my neighbor who is dealing with the difficulties of transgenderism, a child, all of these things, and is being absorbed by the culture. Me sitting down and saying, I think this is bad.
Right.
And here's why. And a response coming back being, I feel very cared for by that. I don't see any articles being written about that.
No.
I see nothing like that.
Right.
Or the fact that like I'm in a neighborhood group text.
Right.
And somebody will put something out there and I'll just be like, hey, the neighborhood Christians on here just letting you guys know that that goes against God's commands.
Neighborhood Christian.
And I love you all. And they think it's great.
Sure.
And I want them to be saved. And they know that.
Right.
And I think there's a level of embracing that I think people need to know. Now, when we think of a community becoming Christian,
sure,
there's a lot of components to that.
Yes.
And we don't have enough time to get into all of them. But one that I wanted to get into a little bit would be this. And even you've recently made a Facebook post that many pastors have jumped on and decided to have opinions on.
Yes.
And all sorts of things. And they go, what does that mean?
Sure.
What does that look like? Tell me more about that.
Right.
And so in your head, what does it look like?
Okay.
And what are some of the ramifications of that?
So I'll start with the big picture and kind of drill down in some specifics. So like, and it is a lot of, not idealism, but it is a lot of vision for like what God could do. And this may not even happen in our lifetime, but it's sowing seeds of what could be possible based on the gospel taking effect and taking root in people's lives. It's the world I would want my kids to live in. And that kind of world is a city in which Christianity is seen as the norm. Seen as the norm, where Sundays people's biggest priority isn't hiking or brunch. It's church. It's going to church, and people want to honor the Sabbath and treat their employees with kindness by giving them appropriate time off.
Yeah.
And honoring God's law that way. And so I think for a Christian
You sound like a socialist.
Oh my gosh. Right. And so I think for a town to become Christian in this way, it would be the prevailing attitude of everyone in the town. It's like, what are you doing this weekend? Well, I'm going to church, of course. Like, it's a norm. Whereas now when you tell people I'm going to church, it's like, oh, that's an interesting choice you're making, but like that would be the norm, and the culture would be predominantly marked by Christian values. So it would be the fruit of the Spirit. It would be ethical Christian norms regarding sexuality and marriage and raising kids. We would see more kids in our town. Boulder is a very dog-centric town. And instead of a plethora of dogs, we'd see abundance of kids.
I would like to let everybody know that you recently got a dog. So you don't hate dogs.
I do not hate dogs.
You just hate cats.
Yes, I do. Okay. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No, don't be sorry. They suck.
And so I think, if that's the vision, like we would love to live in a Christian world, because guess what? That's the world we're going to live in if we are Christians.
Totally.
It will be a Christian world. Well, then what would it look like to live that out now? Well, quite simply, it's going to look like sharing the gospel, living as a faithful disciple where you are, inviting people to church. And it's going to look more like behaving as if you're not an outsider, but centering Christianity as kind of a normal thing. Like, this is what my family does because this is what we believe, and we're Christians. And like believing that Christianity is actually good for people, instead of constantly apologizing and feeling like you've got to like either hide you're a Christian or like show that you're not those kind of Christians. Just kind of own it. Just be like, I'm a Christian and I love you. I want the best for you. You should come to church. You should know Jesus.
Yeah.
That's the embryonic state of starting to influence Christian society. Now you can go to city council meetings. You can go to school board meetings. We need that in Boulder actually, because our school district is struggling with a lot of matters regarding sexuality and transgenderism and such. But so Christians can get involved in those ways, and I would encourage Christians to get involved in those ways. But it starts with a personal relationship with Jesus and advocating for Christianity in the public square, and encouraging business owners, and discipling them in the fullness of the Bible so that they can live out God's ways in all of their life. So it starts with individuals being reconciled to God, but it also extends outward. And for so many Christians, they've adopted a kind of a Christianity that's individual soteriology, where people are just getting saved. And it's just about...
What's soteriology?
Soteriology is the study of salvation. So how are people saved?
Yep.
And so for many Christians, their message of the gospel is, look, I just need to get good with God and then I'm good.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to offer, and I see the Bible offering and God offering to the world, is saying it's a cosmic salvation, not an individual salvation. God cares about redeeming all things to himself, not just individuals.
Yeah, I think it's important too for people. I think when we talk about this, they immediately go, because humans love to swing the pendulum.
Sure.
Right? They immediately go to, are you saying we need to make Christian laws? And I'm like, maybe,
sure.
Like at some point, but like, do you know how far away we are from that?
Right.
Like, why are we talking about that?
Right.
Like, maybe, it's kind of like one of those things when somebody talks to me about the mission field and all these things, and I was like, well, have you gone?
Sure.
Well, I don't know. Like we got to start where we are.
Right.
And I think people need to stop going like, does that mean I need to run for city council? Maybe. There's probably very few people
right.
that would fall to.
Right.
But I think there's some really practical things, like, and something that I've recently experienced, which was, and I talk about way too much in my sermons. It's a common critique. I talk about baseball and Little League baseball too much in my sermons, but becoming a coach on a tournament team and these sorts of things, and then taking over the tournament team that my son's on, and going, we don't play on Sunday mornings. And families go, why? It's because your coach goes to church. Right. I wish I could say, and the star player goes to church. He's really good. We'll get there eventually, who's my son. But it's kind of one of those things where it's going like, hey, that's a really simple move. Yeah. I'm coaching a Little League team. Yep. I'm like, we don't play on Sunday mornings. Right. Because we go to church. Right. And people going, wow, I've never heard that before. I think that's a really simple way when people think about it, when they go, what does it mean to make a community more Christian? I think people making steps like that. Right. Somebody going, what are you doing tonight? I'm going to my Bible study. Do you want to come? Right. It doesn't have to be all these things. I mean, I keep thinking of like the book of The Theology of the Ordinary by Julie Canlis. That's a great resource for understanding the Christian life.
Right.
But I think when we do that, the Christian life will lead to those things.
Yes.
And it also leads to something that's kind of fun to play around with, which is the idea of nominalism. And that a byproduct of Christianity saturating a culture
Right.
is that there will be nominal Christians.
Right.
Anytime there's a large movement of something, maybe it's not as deep as we want in everybody,
Right.
but I can say with confidence with children in a school district, as a pastor, as a husband, as a neighbor, a friend to many people, that Christian nominalism in a culture would be better than the culture that we're getting fed now.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it goes back to something I've been thinking with my friends a lot about is we have to understand that culture shapes people and laws shape people. All legislation, all laws are moral declarations. There is no law that has been made which is not a moral declaration and an ethical declaration. So this idea that you can't legislate morality, it's a really silly statement, because that's what legislation is. It's enacting moral code. And we live in a city, in a culture where there is legislation and there is culture which is shaping people's lives. And what I want for my kids, what you want for your kids, what I want for our church is I want a culture in which it is conducive to Christianity. One of my friends put it this way, we want cultural conditions which are conducive to conversion. We want to set up a culture in which it's more likely that somebody's going to come to church, come to hear the gospel. I mean, for goodness sakes, you think about the Queen of England who recently died, and you look at the ceremony and how saturated it was with Bible, with hymns, with kind of Christian beliefs.
It's amazing.
That's great. Like, and a lot of people may look at that and be like, well, it's just vestiges of Christendom, or, look at England and how secular it is. And yes, that's true. But what would you rather have? Would you rather have either an openly pagan society, an openly atheistic society, which is what ours is? Secular atheism is a lot of people are scared of theocracy. And it's like, well, we have a ruling kind of dogma right now. That's
we have
secular
a
atheism.
religion. We have a national religion.
Exactly. And it's secular atheism. And so what would you rather have? You're going to have to pick, who you will worship. We are worshiping creatures, and cultures worship. And so what do we want our culture to worship? We want our culture to worship God. And that's going to set up our kids, our friends, our neighbors. That's going to set them up to be more likely to attend church and become Christians. Now, that doesn't mean everyone's going to become a Christian. It doesn't mean total regeneration of every person in the town. But guess what it's going to mean is that Christian standards, ethical norms are going to be more pervasive, meaning that crime and homelessness and all of these things are going to decrease when Christianity becomes more prominent.
I agree 100%. Yeah, and so as we just kind of wrap up our time here, the goal on these podcasts is short and sweet, drive to work kind of thing, even though you're probably biking to work if you live in Boulder.
Yeah, maybe.
Or riding one of those. I can't get on board with the scooters, man.
The one-wheel ones?
No, those are even worse. Sorry if you love the one wheel. I just can't. I'm sorry. We won't get into that. Maybe we'll do an episode on one wheels.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
But yeah, so as we just kind of round this, wind this up, as we think about this, I think the goal people need to be seeing here is we want to disciple people into a way that their faith becomes palpable, and not just palpable, but they use their words and their actions and their deeds in a way that permeates the spheres of influence in which God's given them.
Right.
And that's all anybody's asking for in there.
Right.
And believing the Great Commission, that we are to go and make disciples, and we are to teach them, and to obey. Like all of those components of the Great Commission, and resting in the reality that the promise of Christ himself is that he's with us in that. And that should make us bold and courageous. That should give us the confidence we need to go forward. And I'm afraid that if we don't start embracing that, and we might be in trouble, but we're also not at the same time, because God is sovereign and he's in control. But man, I want to be part of something great. I want to be part of a movement of God in a beautiful way that transforms our city. That's why we planted a church here.
That's right.
And that's what we're here to do. And so I think that if anybody takes anything away, I'm sure there's components that they could disagree with, but I think we can all agree that we want more people to know Jesus.
That's right.
And when more people know Jesus, a culture has changed.
Yep.
And that's what we want to do. And that's what we see in 1 Thessalonians, like we're studying right now.
Amen.
Do you have any other thoughts just as we round up our time?
No, I think that's great. I mean, my heart for our church is that we would be a happy band of warriors, that we would be glad in Christ, that we would find our satisfaction in him, and that our attitude would not be so much one of angst and anxiety, although that will happen.
Yeah, for sure.
but Christian concern for the world and for our neighbor. And that's going to be rooted in trusting God's sovereignty, that he currently rules and reigns, that he is good and he is faithful always. And that no matter what comes our way, we can trust his promises always. And so we're going to look forward to that, and we're going to work towards that end.
I love it. Right on, man.
Thanks for joining us for Just Say It. This is a ministry of the Well Church in Boulder. We meet here in Boulder. You can visit us at boulderwell.org. We'd love it if you would subscribe, give it a great rating, and share this episode with a friend. Leave a comment. Let us know what you would love us to talk about on an episode so that we can really address concerns that you're facing in your world.